Hey everybody, this is Dr. Rob DeMartino with Superior Health Solutions. We wanted to make this video for you today to talk about the thyroid, which conditions that affect the thyroid are probably the most underdiagnosed and or misdiagnosed conditions that are out there in the healthcare world. And there is a significant amount of people that are struggling with their thyroid. It's causing them all kinds of symptoms and they can't really understand why. And they maybe go to their doctor, get some tests run, and they're told, well, it's not your thyroid looks like it's working great, so let's go look at other avenues. And they'll be searching and they'll go to all kinds of doctors and do all kinds of testing. Meanwhile, the problem is with the thyroid, we just didn't look at it in the right way or at the right place. That's really what this video is about, to try to get some explanation around what's going on with the thyroid and why there's such misdiagnosis when it comes to it. So first things first, we'll go to our whiteboard here. The idea behind this is that first things first, every single cell inside of your body, all the trillions of cells that you have, need thyroid hormone. Okay, every single one of them has a thyroid hormone receptor on it, and the purpose of that, the purpose of the thyroid hormone getting inside that cell and working, is to run your metabolism. Now, most people are going to relate metabolism to weight loss, which it is, but the real thing that metabolism is all about is making energy. Can your body make energy? Can it take the raw materials that you have and turn that into energy? And all of your cells need energy. Your body needs energy to function. So if you get that energy without the thyroid working, you're not going to have that and you're going to start to get fatigue, which is why it's listed as the main symptom that we see on there. So thyroid hormone can affect just about every aspect and function of our body, and there's a lot to do with it. So the part of the problem with thyroid is when your thyroid hormone starts to go low, your brain, the part of your brain called the pituitary, will notice that your thyroid hormone is going low. And then it's going to kick out a hormone that's called TSH. And that stands for thyroid stimulating hormone. Now that's probably the one that you've gotten run on lab work before, and the doctor may tell you that TSH is normal or TSH is not normal. So when the body's low on thyroid hormone, it says, okay, stimulate more hormone. So the TSH number is going to go up, and that's going to stimulate the actual thyroid gland, which is a butterfly-shaped gland. It sits right here in your throat. And that's going to stimulate it to create what they call T4. So T4 is a thyroid hormone, but there's an important function with T4. T4 is the inactive form of thyroid hormone, meaning it has to be converted to its active form in order for it to work. So you could have all the T4 in the world inside of your body. If you can't convert that to active form, it literally does nothing for you, and you will have every symptom listed that goes along with thyroid and probably more, because it has no way of working if we can't convert it to the active form. Now, traditionally in the medical world, this is what's tested. They'll test the TSH and then they'll test the T4. And why do they typically test those two things? Well, the typical prescription that they're going to give you to resolve this kind of problem is Synthroid or levothyroxine or whatever generic they want to use. That is synthetic T4. So if we put T4 into the system, that's going to tell the brain, okay, we've got plenty in here, stop stimulating so much hormone, and the TSH is going to come into normal range, and they're going to say, look, we fixed your thyroid. It looks nice on paper. But here are the other steps. So what T4 itself is going to actually have to go to get converted, and that conversion occurs at your liver and your gut, around your stomach line here. And that's when that gets converted to a hormone that's called T3. Now, T3 is the active form. It's the active form of thyroid hormone, and that's the one that will then get transported to attach to your cells and create the metabolism inside of your cells so your cell can make energy and you can burn all the more materials that you have inside of your system. So there's a lot of steps that have to occur here. Your brain has to sense that it's off. It has to signal the thyroid to work. The thyroid has to have what it needs to make thyroid hormones. Then from there, it has to, that T4, that inactive T4 has to get transported to your liver, then separately to your gut, to where it's going to get converted into the active form. And there's a whole conversion format that has to go down to get it to active T3. Then that active T3 has to be able to go to your cells and physically get inside the cell without it getting blocked. So while there may be 10 different steps that your thyroid has to take in order to get from step one of making the hormone to the final step of using the hormone, which is when everything is working, if we're only testing one of those or maybe two of those, you're not going to really get the full picture of what's going on with the thyroid, and you're going to have hypothyroid type symptoms but it's going to look like everything is fine because the TSH is a normal number. And truthfully, unfortunately, TSH is probably the worst number to base whether your thyroid function is working well or not, but it is the one that's easily changed when we look at lab work, when you're looking at just doing it from a medication standpoint. So if that one's normal, it does not mean that the rest of your thyroid is normal. So what kind of symptoms does somebody get if it comes around with their thyroid issues? Well, there's a lot of them. If you look up symptoms of thyroid, it's pretty much almost everything underneath the map, but the most common ones that go outside, you know, people always talk about the brittle nails, their nail beds get weak, or their hair starts falling out, things like that. But the most main one is fatigue. If the most searched problem on the internet is chronic fatigue syndrome, the number one cause for that is thyroid problems. But if the thyroid is just looked at from TSH, it'll get misdiagnosed. They don't know why the fatigue is happening, but it is a core thyroid issue. Especially for people who will describe that they sleep and they feel like they sleep a good amount, but they still wake up tired. That's a typical sign you see with thyroid. One of the more common ones is things like depression, even anxiety. Nobody really talks about that as being a symptom of thyroid malfunction, but it really is, and it really is in a big way. Because if the thyroid hormones are off balance, none of the chemicals, the neurotransmitters in your brain work appropriately. Weight gain. Obviously, people who are struggling taking the weight off, they're killing themselves and the weight's staying about the same, or they're not getting a proportionate amount of weight loss considering to the work that they're putting into it. Or if they're just doing all the right things and they feel like they keep gaining, again, that's kind of a textbook sign that somebody's thyroid is off. That's one of the first things that we look at because it relates to a slower metabolism. Yeah, that's going to affect on energy, but if your body can't burn it, it's got to put it somewhere, and the closest place to do that is in adipose tissue or fat. Constipation is a really common one. We talked a lot about the conversion of hormones from T4, the inactive T4 to the active T3. A significant portion of that goes on in the gut. So if the gut is not working, if you've got just something simple enough, quote unquote, like acid reflux or something along those lines, you know you're probably a good chance that you're not converting thyroid hormone over, because you need a proper balance of that acid in the stomach in order to get that to happen. So constipation is a very common symptom that you see along with thyroid problems, and something, again, typically that's not linked along those lines. The other big thing is frequent infections. And getting frequent infections when it comes down to this, that brings us into a whole other conversation about what goes on with the thyroid. So despite the fact that your thyroid has to go through these 10 steps in order to function properly, the last step that really rarely gets looked at is whether or not this is an actual autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Now, Hashimoto's was discovered back in 1914 by a doctor named Dr. Hashimoto, so he named it after himself. And what it essentially means is that the thyroid is being targeted by your own immune system mistakenly, like it's a foreign invader, like it's a bacteria or a virus, and your immune system tries to destroy the thyroid function. So all of this could be out of balance, and we could do a lot of different things, medication, supplements, whatever you do, to try to get that all back to balance. But if the problem is that the immune system is on the outside that's actually attacking the thyroid every time it tries to make thyroid hormone, it doesn't matter whether you get the thyroid hormone from the outside or your thyroid makes it, the tissue is going to get damaged by your immune system. Now, in a subsequent video, we're going to talk a lot more about why that happens and what actually autoimmunity is. But for the purposes of this conversation, about 90% of all thyroid problems are actually considered Hashimoto's. But it just gets misdiagnosed, because the most important thing you need to do when you're looking at this is not just looking at these steps, because these steps have to work too, but there's two different antibodies you have to check for, the TPO and the TGB antibodies. Those guys will tell you, if they're positive, whether or not this is just a traditional hypothyroidism type of case, or if it's an actual autoimmune version of it, which means your thyroid is an innocent bystander. It's trying to work, and every time it does its job and outputs thyroid hormone, your immune system attacks it and throws off that function. So as the tissue gets more and more damaged over the course of time, what's going to happen is eventually you're going to have to change your dosage of medication. The levels are going to go all over the place because you're just not going to have enough function of that tissue to keep up those same levels. It's going to constantly be changed. Well, people who go from high to lower, they're constantly getting their medication switched up, there's a really good chance that it's Hashimoto's. It's typically not tested for or differentiated, because whether in the medical world, if you have Hashimoto's or if you have regular subclinical hypothyroidism or whatever the case may be, the answer is still giving you synthetic T4 and Synthroid or levothyroxine to balance out your TSH. If you don't balance out all of these things. If you have Hashimoto's, you have an immune system problem, not a thyroid problem. The thyroid is the tissue that's being affected, but the immune system is what the actual issue is. If you don't get those things back to balance, the thyroid will never work the way it will, and you're going to consistently have symptoms. So I implore you, if this is something you're dealing with, even if the doctors have told you to look at that, they looked at your thyroid and everything looks great, get this tested appropriately. Because getting this tested appropriately all the way out lays out a very clear picture for where you are. If it's not your thyroid, then that's fine, and you move on to the next logical thing. But for most cases, it ends up being somewhere in the thyroid function that there's something that's not going on the right way, but you don't know that until you get it tested properly. Now again, in the next videos, we're going to talk a little bit more about what autoimmunity is and what you can do about each different portion of this if it's off. So I encourage you to watch those. But first step is the right testing helps you to know what your path you need to walk on.